The sun had dipped behind the jagged peaks, leaving only a few lingering rays that barely touched the earth. Clara James, a solitary Apache woman, sat inside her small cabin deep in the mountains, her fingers absently tracing the old, worn edges of her shawl. The cabin, perched on the edge of the steep ravine, had long since stopped feeling like a home. Its crooked roof and splintering walls whispered the secrets of years spent alone. No company but the wind and the occasional howl of a coyote. She'd long forgotten what it felt like to have someone knock on her door. The days blended together, and with every sunset, Clara was reminded that she lived in a world where no one cared about a woman like her. The knock came just after dusk, slow and deliberate, like the hand that made it wasn't sure it had the right to be heard. Clara James stood frozen by the door of her one-room shack, her heart thudding beneath the worn shawl she hadn't bothered to take off in 3 winters. No one ever came this far, especially not for a woman like her. Up the steep ravine, where even the sun seemed to shy away. She looked around her crumbling walls, past the one-legged table and the soot-blackened stove, and whispered to herself, "Lord, please, let it be someone kind." When she opened the door, she had to take a step back. Not from fear, but from the sheer size of the man standing before her. He looked like he'd been carved from the mountain itself, broad-shouldered, his frame hunched slightly to avoid scraping the doorframe. His beard was thick and wild, but it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention. They weren't hard, like most men's eyes. They looked like someone had told him a secret so heavy he could barely hold it in. "Ma'am," he rumbled, his hat in his hand. "Storm's coming. Was wondering if I might rest here just till it passes." Clara blinked, not sure what to say. Her cabin had never been anything more than a slant-roofed afterthought, built by her ex-husband's cruel ambition and abandoned after his departure. She swallowed hard and stepped aside, her voice barely above the rain beginning to fall. "You're bigger than my house," she said. That's when the mountain man did something no one expected. He didn't laugh or boast. He didn't try to squeeze through the door like a proud man. He stood there for a long moment, and then, without warning, he dropped to his knees, his eyes filling with tears. "Ain't no one ever let me in without question," he whispered, still kneeling on the stoop, his tears mixing with the dirt. Clara froze. What kind of man wept at the door of a shack? What kind of man knelt when others barged in? She didn't know what to do, so she reached out and touched his shoulder lightly. "The storm's not the only thing that needs shelter," she said, surprising herself with the words. He nodded but didn't move. She realized then that he wasn't waiting for her to let him in. He was waiting to be sure it wouldn't hurt her to say yes. So she did. "Come in, mister," she said softly. "I've got soup, if you don't mind it thin, and a fire, if you don't mind it quiet." As he ducked inside, carefully folding his massive frame to avoid knocking into the sagging beams, something strange happened. The room didn't feel smaller. It felt warmer. He took the stool without breaking it, his hands folded like a boy's at church. Clara stirred the pot, doing her best not to stare. "Name's Jesse Cole," he said after a long silence. "Been living where there ain't much kindness left?" Clara met his eyes. "Then maybe you're due for some." But as the wind howled outside and the door creaked behind him, Clara noticed something else. His boots were nearly torn through, and a long scrape marred the length of his left arm. She didn't ask about it yet. Something told her there was more beneath the surface of this giant than hunger and tears. And she wondered, if a man that big had nowhere else to go, what had the world done to him before he knocked? Clara didn't sleep that night. Not really. Not with a man like Jesse Cole beneath her roof. Not with the storm pressing down on the cabin like fists, and certainly not with the questions crawling through her chest. He lay curled near the stove, arms folded beneath his head, the firelight catching the wet glint in his beard where his tears hadn't dried. She hadn't asked why he cried. She hadn't dared, but every so often, she looked at him from her cot in the corner and wondered what it took to bring a man of that size to his knees at a woman's door. Her eyes kept landing on the ragged scrape along his arm. He hadn't mentioned it, but when he dozed off, he winced every time he turned that side toward the fire. She knew better than to poke around in a man's pain uninvited, but something about him made her feel like if she didn't ask soon, she might miss something important, something sacred. At dawn, the wind slowed, and the gray light filtered through her tattered curtain. Jesse stirred and sat up, blinking like he wasn't sure if he'd dreamed the whole night. "Didn't mean to take your only fire," he said softly. "Didn't mean to take your peace." Clara poured the last of the broth into a tin cup and handed it to him without meeting his eyes. "You didn't take anything," she murmured. "You made it feel like someone was watching the place for once." He looked at her with a kind of hurt, deeper than kindness. Then quietly, Jesse rolled up his sleeve, revealing the full extent of the wound. It wasn't just a scrape. It was a deep, jagged gash, half-healed but infected, surrounded by bruises that looked more like boot marks than brush cuts. Clara James stiffened. "Who did that?" she asked, her voice sharper than she meant it to be. Jesse Cole glanced toward the door. "I was working near Dead Man's Hollow," he said in a low voice. "A bunch of fellas caught me passing through, thought I looked like someone else. They decided to teach me something anyway." Clara swallowed hard. "You didn't fight back?" Jesse gave a slow nod. "Not till they started talking about a girl, some settler's daughter gone missing. They thought maybe I was the one who took her. I ain't touched no one, but they didn't care." His voice cracked like firewood breaking apart in a cold wind. They just needed someone to blame. Clara's hands trembled as she knelt beside him, a clean cloth in her hands, her last bit of pine salve heating up on the stove. "Well," she said, dabbing at the wound, "you found the only soul in these woods who's ever been blamed for breathing too loud." Jesse flinched but didn't pull away. "You ain't afraid of me?" he asked. Clara met his eyes squarely. "I'm afraid of ghosts." "You ain't one," he replied, his voice low. A long silence passed between them, filled only with the soft snap of the fire and the distant sound of rain easing off the roof. Then, quietly, Jesse asked, "What happened to your man?" Clara hesitated, her chest tightening with old memories. "Mine left me here when I got sick," she said quietly. "Said the hills were better company. He ain't wrong." Jesse nodded slowly, his eyes dark. "Then maybe it's a mercy he's gone." Clara didn't answer. She just pressed the cloth gently against his wound, whispering, "Funny how both our scars come from folks who should have known better." In that moment, something shifted. Jesse wasn't a mountain anymore. He was a mirror, reflecting back all the things Clara had buried deep inside herself. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel ashamed of her tiny shack. Not with him in it. The next morning, the sun broke through for the first time in days, painting gold across the moss-covered trees. Jesse stepped outside, barefoot, his boots still soaked from the storm. Clara watched him from her crooked porch, her arms crossed, unsure whether to feel embarrassed or strangely proud that he was seeing her world without apology. He took a long breath, then turned toward her. "Let me fix it." Clara blinked. "Fix what?" He pointed at the roof, the leaning porch rail, and the patch of dirt where the chicken coop used to stand. "All of it. The house, the yard, the whole place. Clara let out a dry laugh. You want to fix the world's ugliest shack? You serious? Jesse nodded once, calm and steady. I don't got much else to offer, but I can work. And I'd like to repay you for the fire and the bread, and for not looking at me like I'm a thing to fear. Clara didn't answer right away. Her throat tightened. No man had offered her anything in years, not without a price, not without a look in his eyes that made her skin crawl. But Jesse's offer had no hunger in it, just stillness, just dignity. You don't owe me a thing, she said softly. You bled on my floor. That's payment enough. Jesse smiled slightly, a hint of warmth in his eyes. Let me stay a week, just a week. I'll patch your roof, rehang that door, maybe get that chimney drawn again. Then I'll go. No trouble to you? Something about his tone unsettled her. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was so gentle. It felt like truth. You're not like other men, she muttered. I ain't trying to be. That was when she noticed the bundle tied to his back. A rolled canvas, some tools, and a small sack of nails. You were always planning to fix someone's house, she said, her voice hesitant. No, he replied, his voice steady. I was planning to build one, just didn't know where it'd be. Clara's voice was thin when she said, This ain't much of a place to settle. Jesse looked around. It's got a soul. That's more than I had yesterday. Clara opened her mouth, then shut it, unsure how to respond. What do you say to a man who calls your shame sacred? He didn't ask again. He just started. By noon, he'd swept the porch, pulled out the broken floorboard near the stove, and was whittling a new brace for the leg of her table. She brought him cool water, her eyes tracing the muscles beneath his shirt as he worked. You do this for a living? She asked, her voice quiet. Used to, Jesse Cole replied, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. Before I got chased out of town for helping the wrong girl. Clara's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Jesse stood and looked her in the eye. Her pa didn't like that I was brown. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unsaid words. Then Clara spoke, without hesitation. You can stay longer than a week. Jesse's lips curled into a small smile, and for the first time, she saw something in him loosen. A weight she hadn't realized he carried seemed to fall away. Before she could turn to step inside, he said something that stopped her dead in her tracks. Your house ain't ugly, Clara. It's small, but it's kind. Clara blinked, the words catching her off guard. And when you told me I was bigger than it, Jesse continued, I didn't cry 'cause you were right. I cried 'cause no one's ever let me feel safe in something smaller than me before. That's when Clara realized Jesse wasn't just building shelter for himself. He was trying to build belonging. The next day, Clara watched from the kitchen window as Jesse hauled a heavy stack of rotted timber from the back of the cabin. He moved slow but deliberate, as if each piece was a memory he needed to handle gently. Sweat soaked the frayed collar of his shirt, but his face remained calm and focused. Clara stirred the pot of beans on the stove, her thoughts swirling like the smoke rising from the fire. She didn't know why she kept letting him stay. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was the way her shoulders relaxed when he was near, as if her bones remembered something she didn't. Just after noon, she stepped outside with a tin cup of water and found Jesse kneeling in the weeds, studying a pile of stones that used to be her garden wall. You planning to rebuild that? She asked, her voice soft. No, he replied, shaking his head. This wall didn't fall. Someone knocked it down. Clara frowned. The storm did it. Jesse shook his head again. Storm don't knock over dry-laid stone unless the ground goes with it and your soil's firm. This wall was torn out piece by piece. Clara didn't answer right away. She remembered now. Her brother, drunk and angry, throwing stone after stone into the night, cursing the garden because it reminded him of their mother. "It wasn't the wind," she whispered, barely a breath. Jesse looked up at her. "Then why are you rebuilding everything but this?" Clara turned her back to him, her voice carrying. "Because this wall was meant to keep things out, and I already know what that's like." The silence between them stretched long, like a shadow at dusk. Then Jesse spoke, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "Some walls are made for protecting, not hiding." Clara stopped in her tracks. She turned back to face him. "You think I've been hiding?" Jesse didn't flinch. "I think you're still living inside what other people left behind." His words hit her like a hammer, not with anger, but with recognition. He wasn't trying to insult her. He was naming something she couldn't even put into words herself. That night, as the stars pressed low and thick against the sky, Clara found Jesse sitting at the edge of the garden stones, cleaning the grime from each one with a rag. "You don't have to do that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They're just rocks." Jesse didn't look up. "You ever think maybe your mama laid these? Maybe your hands touched everyone?" Clara swallowed hard. Her throat tightened as memories stirred in her. She used to hum when she planted. Said the earth listens better to music than to words. Jesse smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time the earth heard her voice again. The next morning, Clara found something she hadn't seen in years. A row of stones, not as a wall, but as a path, leading from her porch to the garden. It was as if Jesse had been guiding her back to something long lost. She stepped barefoot onto the first stone, then another. The morning dew stung her toes, but she didn't stop. She walked the whole path, slow and steady, until she reached the overgrown weeds where her garden once bloomed with tomatoes, corn, and herbs she no longer remembered the names of. Jesse didn't say a word. Jesse Cole just watched from the shade of the barn, his expression unreadable. Clara James, her eyes drawn to the quiet rhythm of his work, spoke softly, almost to herself. "I think I'd like to plant again." "Then we'll plant," Jesse said, as though the matter was settled with no question. But even as he spoke, Clara saw his gaze flicker toward the forest, a tension in his posture, as if he was watching for something or someone. That's when it hit her. For all the work Jesse had done, all the peace he'd brought, there was still a story he hadn't told. A story that followed him like a shadow, just out of reach. It was near sundown when Clara noticed a silhouette moving in the distance. Lanky, with a crooked posture, a rifle slung carelessly across his back. Jesse was splitting firewood behind the barn, but the moment Clara gasped, he dropped the axe mid-swing and stepped around to the front as though he already knew who it was. The man stopped at the edge of the property, just beyond the broken fence, and flashed a smile that never reached his eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Didn't expect to find you holed up with a woman." Jesse didn't move, didn't speak, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed that he recognized the man. "Friend of yours?" Clara asked cautiously. The man chuckled. "We're blood, kinda. Used to run together, till he decided he'd grown a conscience." Jesse's voice was low, firm. "Turn around, Buck. You ain't welcome here." Buck clicked his tongue. "So this is the mighty Jesse Cole now? Playing house with some backwoods widow? Thought you were chasing something bigger?" Clara stepped between them, her heart pounding in her chest. "You've got no business here. Move on." Buck laughed again, eyeing the cabin. "She's got grit, I'll give her that." He glanced at the house, then said, "Bet it's warmer inside than that cave you used to call home. But I ain't here for trouble. Just came to collect." Jesse stepped forward, his presence towering. "You got no claim on me?" Buck's expression darkened. "That right? You forget who took the fall for you in Tall Pines? You walked free, I got 7 years in a box, 7 years thinking about what you owe me." Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What's he talking about, Jesse?" Buck smirked. "Didn't tell her, did you? How you were the one who put the sheriff's son in the dirt, and I kept quiet. Said it was me. He tried to slit a Lakota girl's throat in the creek bed." Jesse's voice was steady, his words quiet but sharp. "She was 12. You call that murder?" Buck's eyes narrowed. "I call it a noose waiting for the wrong man." The silence stretched, thick and burning, like the heat of a fire long gone cold. Clara stared at Jesse, trying to reconcile the man she knew with the one Buck described. "Is it true?" she whispered. Jesse didn't flinch. "Every word. But I won't apologize for saving her." Buck pulled out a flask, took a swig, and tossed it onto the grass. "You owe me, brother, and I don't want money. I want your horse, the black one. Strong legs, clean hooves. She'll fetch a good price in Elkridge." Jesse's eyes darkened. "You touch her, and I'll bury you under her hoofprints." Buck sneered. "That the old Jesse Cole I hear about? Maybe he ain't dead after all." With a final sneer, Buck turned and started walking away, whistling a hymn that sounded like it came straight from hell. When Buck disappeared over the rise, Clara turned to Jesse. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to bring his shadow into your light," Jesse said. "You're all that's good around here." Clara swallowed hard. "But if he comes back?" "He will," Jesse said, his voice calm but dark. "And next time, he won't be asking." The fragile peace they'd built seemed to crack, like thin ice beneath a horse's hooves. And somewhere behind Jesse's stillness, Clara saw something new in his eyes. Not fear, but a promise of war if it came to that. Jesse didn't sleep that night. He stood by the door like an old statue, rifle across his chest, listening for every shift of the wind, every distant coyote howl. Clara sat at the table, her hands folded tight, the candlelight turning her knuckles white. The cabin felt different now, less like a sanctuary and more like a target. "He's not done with us," Clara said softly. Jesse nodded, the quiet strength of his presence enough to fill the room. "He never is. Buck only knows how to burn what others build." Outside, the moon had dropped low enough to cast eerie shadows from the pines. The wind seemed to carry the past back with every breath. When morning broke, Jesse saddled his mare but didn't ride off. Instead, he led her down the stone path Clara had built. Each rock a labor of pain, now turned into purpose. Jesse Cole knelt on the ground, running his calloused fingers over the stones, muttering something under his breath in a language Clara didn't understand. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Lakota," he replied, his voice soft, almost reverent. "A blessing my mother taught me, for strength, for clarity, when your enemy wears a familiar face." Clara knelt beside him, feeling the weight of his words as they settled in the air between them. "This place," she said quietly. "It was meant to be quiet, safe." Jesse met her eyes, his gaze heavy with meaning. "That's why he hates it." Above them, a hawk screeched, soaring high into the clear sky before heading west toward Elk Ridge. Jesse stood up, squinting into the morning light, his face set in determination. "Castle trade lies and stir the coals in town," he said. "We need to be ready." Clara's heart skipped. "Ready for what?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Whatever storm he brings back. That afternoon, Jesse returned from the woodshed, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth, hidden beneath a stack of firewood. When he unwrapped it inside the cabin, Clara's breath caught in her throat. "That's not a tool," she said, her voice shaking. "No," Jesse replied, his voice calm and steady. "It's a memory wrapped in iron." He held up a long rifle, its barrel etched with native symbols and burn marks across its length. Clara reached for it hesitantly. "You were a warrior once," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jesse didn't answer immediately. Instead, he checked the chamber and oiled the bolt of the rifle. "Still am, if someone threatens what I love." That night, they double-latched every door and lit every lantern. Not for comfort, but so they could see the shadows before they turned into men. Clara slept with the shawl Jesse had given her weeks ago, the coarse wool still warm from his presence, while Jesse stood outside under the stars, speaking to them in a language that most had forgotten. Around midnight, the sound of a wagon wheel cracked through the air like an old bone breaking, followed by the rumble of hooves and the harsh voices of men. Jesse stepped into the clearing, rifle raised, his eyes narrowed and alert. The torchlight flickered in the distance, revealing Buck Carter flanked by two lean men, each carrying a pistol and grins too wide for comfort. "I didn't want it to come to this," Buck called out, his voice strained with false calm. "But you're a hard man to reason with." "Turn around," Jesse warned, his voice low and steady. "You won't like how this ends." Buck smirked, unflinching. "I never liked how it started." One of the men raised his pistol. Clara, standing behind the cracked door, felt her breath catch in her throat. She had no weapon, only her will, and the knowledge that this home had already survived one war. But this time, the war was at her door. The man who had once wept at her kindness now stood like granite, willing to fall if it meant she would rise. The torchlight flickered, and the trees stood still, waiting. Beneath Clara's feet, the stone path she had built seemed to warm with the blood of old wounds. The first shot rang out before the threat had a name. The man to the left of Buck, his pistol cocked, dropped like a stone. His hat spiraled into the pine needles. The second man raised his gun, but his hands trembled. The mountain had done that to men, shaken the false bravado right out of them. Buck didn't flinch. He stepped forward, torch raised, his voice still calm. "You just killed my brother." Jesse didn't blink. He died with a gun in his hand. "You're walking into a house that once healed you." "She lied to me," Buck growled, his voice thick with rage. "She made me feel small, and then you came, some half-breed with sad eyes and arms like oak trunks." Clara stepped out from behind the door, her eyes wide, her face pale, but her voice firm. "Buck, go home. This place was never yours. You left it behind when you broke my ribs and blamed the floor." Buck turned his gaze to her, his lips curling into a sneer. "I gave you everything, food, a roof, my name, and then you took the rest," Clara said, her voice steady. "My peace, my voice, my hope." Jesse moved slowly between them, his body like a wall. "You want to hit something, Buck? Hit me." Buck chuckled, his laugh dark. "Gladly." But as he stepped forward, something shifted. The second man, barely 20, lowered his gun. The boy muttered, "He said you were hiding cattle, said you stole his land." Jesse Cole looked at him, his gaze steady. "Do I look like a thief?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir. You look like someone who finally stopped running." Buck Carter's face twisted, his mouth pulling into a sneer. "Traitor." The boy backed away, his eyes wide. "I didn't sign up to shoot a woman for leaving a man like you." Buck snapped, turning toward the boy. He aimed his pistol, not at Jesse, but at the boy's back. That was his mistake. The second shot came from Clara James. She had taken Jesse's sidearm from the kitchen shelf, her hands steady as a mountain. The bullet tore through Buck's shoulder, sending him spinning sideways, his body jerking with the impact. He dropped, falling to his knees, his breath coming in harsh gasps. "You!" he hissed, looking up at Clara. "You'd shoot me?" "No," she said, her voice cold. "I'd shoot the man who turned you into this." Jesse picked up Buck's pistol, emptied the chamber, and tossed it deep into the woods. Buck groaned, clutching his wound, his face dark with rage. "You think they'll let you live out here in peace? You think your mountain will protect you forever?" Jesse's voice was low, steady. "No, but I'll protect her until it doesn't." The boy helped Buck to his feet, his voice barely a whisper. "Let's go. This place ain't ours." Buck didn't argue. He stumbled back toward the wagon, leaving behind blood, pride, and the last thread of control he ever held over Clara. As the sound of hooves faded into the distance, Jesse turned to Clara. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "That shot? I didn't even think. I just did it." Jesse's eyes softened. "That's what courage looks like." Clara stared at the gun in her hands, then handed it back to him, her fingers lingering for just a moment. "I hate it." Jesse gave a small smile. "That's what makes you strong." They walked together down the stone path, side by side, the silence between them full of things they didn't need to say. The wind had shifted, not gentler, not harsher, just honest. For the first time in years, there was no echo behind their steps, no ghost in the walls, only breath, heartbeat, and a truth big enough to share. Pain had left its mark, but it hadn't stayed. And neither had the man who tried to own her silence. The fire inside her small stone hearth hadn't burned this cleanly in years. Jesse fed it slowly, his movements deliberate, like he didn't want to disturb the room's quiet breath. Clara sat across from him on the worn rug, her knees pulled to her chest, eyes not on the flames but on the quilt draped over her shoulders, the one she had stitched for herself and Buck years ago, never imagining it would end up wrapped around a man who had protected her with silence, not fists. "Why'd you cry?" she asked suddenly, her voice breaking the stillness. Jesse didn't look up. He ran his hand along the grain of the floorboards, his voice soft. "When I said you were bigger than my house, I cried because no one's ever said something that kind." Clara blinked, unsure whether to smile or cry. "I was embarrassed." "So was I," he said, his voice low, but not by your house. "By the way you still opened it." Clara looked at him, confusion and gratitude mixing in her chest. "That man left cracks in your ribs and your soul, and still you let a stranger in." "You weren't a stranger," she whispered. "You were the first man who didn't ask me to explain myself." Jesse stood, ducking slightly to avoid the beam overhead. "When I was younger, I tried to live in towns, tried to fit my legs under desks made for smaller men, tried to date women who thought my silence meant stupidity." He crouched beside her. "Then I came out here, hoping if I got big enough, the ache would get smaller. But it didn't." She touched the scar on his knuckle. "What healed it?" Jesse's eyes were steady. "You, I think. Your porch, your apology, your truth." Clara smiled, but it faded quickly. "What happens now? You just stay here?" "Not unless you want me to." She shook her head, her voice almost lost. "Not no, but not yes either. I've been someone's project before, someone's shame to fix. I can't be that again." Jesse's face softened, his gaze never leaving hers. Then let me be something else. Let me carry wood, fix the fence, sit beside you without filling the room with my needs. Clara swallowed hard, her heart tightening in her chest. You'd really just be here? I've been alone so long, Jesse said, his voice quieter now. I forgot what it feels like to be useful without taking. They sat together in the warmth for a while. The quilt shifted from Clara's shoulders to both their backs, the fire cracking softly in the hearth. A tin cup steamed on the table, and outside, the trees no longer loomed. They stood, present, patient. Clara whispered, "Tomorrow I'll go into town, sell my beets, tell them you're here. Let them think what they will." "They'll talk," Jesse said, his tone resigned but calm. "Let them," Clara replied, her voice steady now, free from fear. "For once, I'll let the world shrink instead of me," Clara James whispered to herself. A long silence passed between them. Not tense, not loaded, just full. And in that fullness, something unspoken bloomed. Not love, not yet, but the kind of stillness that made love possible. No more apologies, no more proving. Just two people too bruised to run, too tired to pretend, and finally warm enough to sit beside the same fire. The next morning, Clara found it by accident, tucked beneath a half-eaten biscuit and a folded cloth. The old woven basket she'd used for beet deliveries hadn't held a secret in years. But there it was. An envelope, creased with time. The ink smudged but unmistakably hers. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. She hadn't written this, but the handwriting was hers, from a time she barely remembered, when she still had hope that letters meant something. "To whoever finds this," it began, "if I've made it to tomorrow, burn this. But if you're reading this and I'm gone, tell Buck I tried." Her breath caught in her throat. Buck. Her daughter's name hadn't passed her lips in 2 years, not since the neighbors whispered she was better off without her. Not since she'd stopped sending letters that were never answered. "I left because I was scared," the letter continued. "Not of him, of becoming what he said I was. Small, pathetic, worthless. If Buck ever asks, tell her I stayed alive, that I kept the door unlocked, that I never stopped carving her name into the bedpost each night just to feel like I still mattered." Tears stained the paper as Clara dropped it to the floor. Jesse Cole, returning from chopping wood, found her sitting in the sunbeam that had crept through the patched roof. He crouched down beside her, waiting silently. She didn't speak, just handed him the letter. He read it in complete silence, then folded it carefully. "When did you write that?" he asked softly. "Years ago," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "I must have forgotten it was there." "Why'd you keep it?" "Because I didn't believe it," she whispered. "Not until now." "Believe what?" Jesse asked, his voice gentle. "That I wasn't what he said I was." Jesse sat beside her, their knees touching. "What changed?" "You," she admitted. "Not because you saved me, because you didn't try to." Jesse leaned his head back against the beam. "I was scared last night," he said quietly. "Not of you. Of wanting this too badly, of saying something wrong and making you disappear." "I almost did," she said. "Disappear?" He nodded, his eyes deep with understanding. "I know." Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant hooves. A wagon rattled in the distance. Clara didn't look up. "I think she's alive," she said. "Cass. I felt it in my bones for years, but I thought maybe she'd be better if I didn't come looking. And now? Now I want her to know I'm still here." Jesse looked at the basket. "Then write a new letter." This time, Clara said with a soft smile. "Let her know she's not coming back to the same woman. She's coming back to a patched roof, a washed floor, and a mountain of a man who cries when someone sees his heart. And a mother who finally sees her own," Jesse said. Clara stood slowly, her bones creaking, but her chest lighter. She lit a candle, pulled out a clean sheet of paper, and began to write. This one didn't begin with sorrow. It began with a welcome. "Dear Cass," she wrote, "if you ever come back, there'll be a chair by the fire, a quilt with your name sewn into it, and a man here who understands how much silence can mean." She paused, looked at Jesse, and added, "And I've finally forgiven myself for the things I didn't say. I hope someday you will too." The storm came without warning, a rolling wall of darkness that swallowed the sun and dropped the sky onto Clara's homestead like a curse. Years ago, it would have meant disaster. The roof had always been a patchwork of sorrow and guesswork, a metaphor for everything she couldn't hold together. But that night, as thunder cracked and the wind howled like ghosts pounding on her door, something strange happened. Nothing leaked. Not a single drop landed on the kitchen floor. The chimney stayed firm. The walls didn't rattle. Clara sat in her wooden chair by the fire, a blanket over her knees, and just listened. Jesse sat on the floor beside her, his shoulder pressed against her leg, carving something quietly with a blade and a pine block. It had become their ritual now, these quiet moments, the space between confessions, where the pain stopped echoing and started dissolving. Clara could hardly believe how a silence like this once terrified her. Now it made her feel whole. "You ever been in a house during a storm that didn't leak?" Clara James asked, half laughing. Jesse Cole looked up at the ceiling where raindrops traced invisible lines, but never broke through. "Not till now," he said. "It's strange," she said, her voice thoughtful. "The things you never dare to expect." "It's not the roof," Jesse replied. "It's you." Clara looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "It held because you wanted it to," Jesse said, his voice steady. "Because you needed it to. Because for once you believed you deserved shelter." Clara swallowed hard. The truth of it hit deeper than any insult Tommy Wells had ever muttered. "I used to think the leaks were punishment," she whispered, "that no matter how hard I worked, something would always fail, that I wasn't allowed to have peace." Jesse stood slowly and walked to the door, pushing it open. Outside, the storm raged, but his face softened. "You're not who you were, Clara," he said. Clara stayed seated, unsure if she could stand under the weight of his words. "You've changed," Jesse added. "You don't walk like you're apologizing anymore." "That's because you don't look at me like I'm broken." "That's because you're not," he said simply. The wind howled through the trees. Clara stood, finally, and walked to him. She took his hand. "There's something I haven't told you," she said. "Back when I was with him, he made me believe no one would ever stay in this house willingly, that if anyone came by, it'd only be to take something." "I didn't come to take anything," Jesse said. "I know," Clara replied. "Then why are you crying?" he asked gently. She hadn't realized the tears had started. "Because this storm is the first one I've ever watched from inside, without flinching." They stood like that for a long time, hand in hand, framed by a doorway that used to welcome no one. Outside, lightning split the sky, revealing their reflections in the window. Two figures weathered by different tragedies, stitched together by something no one else would understand. "Do you think she'll come?" Clara asked, her voice soft. "Cass?" Jesse nodded. "I think she'll feel the shift, even from far away. I want her to know this house isn't cursed anymore. Then keep the door open, he said. Let the rain clean the steps. Let the wind carry your name. Clara turned back inside, grabbed the fire poker, and lifted it to the beam above the hearth. She carved one word into the wood. Home. I'm not afraid of the leaks anymore, she said, because this place was never broken. I was just waiting for someone who saw more than rot and ruin. And now? Jessie asked. Now I see a roof that held, a fire that stayed lit, and a man who didn't run when he heard the storm coming. It was early morning when Clara saw her. No more than a silhouette at first, moving slowly along the muddy ridge where the path twisted like a scar through the trees. The mist hadn't lifted yet, and the sky was a soft gray, like someone had scraped the stars off with a blunt knife. Clara stood on the porch, holding her breath. She knew it was Cass. She could feel it in her bones, in the quiet ache behind her ribs. Jessie came up behind her silently, his hand settling on the small of her back. She's limping, he said, squinting. Left leg? Old injury? She fell off the porch when she was 10, Clara whispered. I told her the nails were sticking up, but she wouldn't listen. Jessie looked at her, then back at the figure approaching. She looks strong. She was always stronger than me, Clara said, her voice thick. They waited in silence as the figure drew closer, the shape resolving with each slow step. A young woman with a knapsack, her hair tangled, dress soaked at the hem, boots caked in red dirt. But her eyes, when they met Clara's, held that same defiant spark she'd had as a child. Mama, Cass said, her voice low and rusty from travel. It's not leaking, Clara said, her voice cracking as she stepped off the porch. The roof, it's holding. Cass blinked, confused, then looked up. You fixed it? Number, he did. Clara gestured back toward Jessie, who offered a respectful nod. But I patched it. I kept it dry because I knew you might come. Cass dropped her bag and just stood there, staring. I didn't think you'd want to see me. Why? Clara asked softly. Because I didn't believe in this place. I didn't believe in you. Clara stepped closer, taking her daughter's hands. You were right not to. It wasn't a home then, not for either of us. And now? Now it's a roof that doesn't leak, a floor that doesn't give out, a kitchen with a fire that doesn't die. Cass looked over her shoulder at the door. Is that all? No, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion as tears filled her eyes. There's a man who cries when I talk about my shame, and a porch that's waiting for your footsteps. Cass swallowed hard. I have nowhere else to go. Then it's a good thing you were always meant to come back, Clara said, pulling her daughter into an embrace. It was a long, trembling thing, spanning years of silence and regret. Jessie stepped back, giving them space, his eyes damp but proud. Clara James watched as Jessie Cole and Cass stood together on the porch. Are you? Cass asked, looking up at him over her mother's shoulder. A guest, Jessie said. A roof fixer, a woodcutter, and sometimes a man who forgets how to speak when the world shows him grace. You're the one who made her brave. Clara smiled faintly. She already was. I just stayed long enough to prove her roof wasn't the only thing that could hold. Together, the three of them stepped onto the porch. Inside, the fire was warm, and the house didn't creak the way it used to. It wasn't afraid of people anymore. It wasn't afraid of memories or storms. It had become just a house, finally allowed to be what it was always meant to be, a home with room for second chances. Cass touched the carving on the beam, the word home, and smiled. You finally wrote it down. It took me a while to believe it, Clara said. But now? Cass asked. Now, Clara said, looking at Jessie. "It's the only word that fits." And in that quiet moment, as the mist gave way to the morning light, the three of them stood together. Not as strangers, not as broken things, but as something whole, born not of perfection, but of love earned the long way round. The wind that once howled through the eaves now whispered, as if careful not to disturb the hush that had settled inside the little house. Jessie sat at the table, carving a small figurine out of pine. His hands moved with the slow grace of someone who knew how to stay, who had learned the art of quiet presence. Clara stood near the stove, stirring a pot of soup that smelled of roots and rosemary, while Cass swept the floor with rhythmic strokes, her eyes occasionally drifting to the window. "You know," Cass said softly, "I thought this place would collapse if I ever stepped back inside." Clara smiled without turning. "It nearly did, but someone braced it just long enough for me to remember what it meant to stand." Jessie looked up, locking eyes with Cass. "And now?" he asked, a soft, satisfied smile on his lips. "Now it feels like it's been waiting." "It has," Clara whispered. "Just like I did." A knock came on the door, gentle and unsure. Cass opened it, revealing a neighbor boy no older than 10, holding a sack of kindling. "Mama said you might need firewood," he said. "Said you might have guests again now that the roof don't leak." Cass crouched to his height and took the sack. "Thank you. It's warm now, but it's always good to be ready." The boy grinned. "Mama said you was dead." "I felt like it," Clara said, her voice soft. "But I'm not. Not anymore." The boy nodded solemnly and turned to go, then paused. "Is he the mountain man folks whisper about?" Cass looked at Jessie, who only smiled. "He's a friend," she said. "He fixes what others leave broken." The door shut gently behind him, and the silence that returned was softer now, like a blanket rather than a void. Cass moved toward the beam near the fireplace, where Clara had once carved the word home. Slowly, she pulled a knife from her pocket, an old one, dulled at the edges. "May I?" she asked. "Always." Beneath the word home, she scratched the letters one by one. H-E-L-D. Jessie crossed the room without a word, took her hand, and traced the letters with his fingers. "A house doesn't become a home when the roof is fixed," he said. "It becomes one when someone's willing to stay under it, even when it's raining." "And when someone chooses to return," Clara added. They sat together by the fire that night, the three of them, passing warm bread and soup between them. There were no grand speeches, no promises spoken aloud, but the silence was thick with meaning. When Jessie rose to fetch another log for the fire, Cass caught his sleeve. "You never told me why you cried that night," she said softly. He paused, then turned to face her. "Because it wasn't your house that was small. It was the world that had taught you to apologize for it. And when you opened the door anyway, I didn't know how to carry that kind of grace. So it crushed me," Clara whispered, "in the best way." She let go of his sleeve. "It didn't crush me. It built me." Jessie smiled and kissed the top of her head like a father might, then turned to the hearth. As the flames crackled, Clara whispered, "Do you still think you're bigger than my house?" Cass looked around. The table, the warmth, the carved beam, the man who had stayed, and the mother who had waited. "No," she said, "but I think this house is finally big enough for all of me." And outside, in the quiet of the hills, the wind passed gently over the roof, no longer searching for cracks or places to weep through. The house held. Because she did. Because they all did.